Learn quick whose ground you're standing on. Remember respect next time.
Wasn't much of a hat. Wasn't much of a lesson.
A boot came down hard on a battered hat lying in the mud, and the man standing over it ground his heel slow enough for everyone on the street to watch him do it. Man walks into my town, he learns quick whose ground he's standing on. That hat's ruined now. Maybe you'll remember to show proper respect next time, before I decide your boots need the same lesson. The stranger didn't reach for the hat right away. He looked down at it, then up at the man grinding his heel into the mud, with an expression that carried no anger in it at all. Wasn't much of a hat. Wasn't much of a lesson either. Duke Farrow laughed, loud enough that half of Copper Bend heard it from their windows, certain the drifter's quiet words meant nothing but a humiliated man's empty pride. Within 5 days, that laugh would cost Pharaoh every dollar of company scrip he'd ever forced down a miner's throat, and it would cost him considerably more than his authority. But to understand why a ruined hat in the mud unraveled an entire mining company's grip on Copper Bend, you have to go back 3 years, to the day Duke Farrow decided that a man's wages were worth more to him locked in a company ledger than paid out in honest coin. Copper Bend sat high in the Colorado mountains in the summer of 1888, a mining settlement built entirely around the Ackerman Copper Company's single productive vein, and Duke Farrow, the company's foreman for 3 patient years, had discovered early in his tenure that controlling the miners' wages mattered considerably more to genuine power than controlling their labor directly. Pharaoh had convinced the company's absentee owners, through carefully falsified reports of local banditry too dangerous for cash payroll shipments, to pay every miner exclusively in company scrip, worthless paper anywhere beyond Copper Bend's borders. Redeemable only at the company store Pharaoh himself had quietly come to own a controlling interest in through the same 3 years of patient, invisible corruption. Pharaoh was 41 years old, broad and physically imposing in the particular way of a man who had once done honest labor himself before discovering that controlling other men's labor paid considerably better. With a booming voice he used to project confidence, and a pair of small calculating eyes that never once matched the warmth of that voice. He did not carry himself like a gunslinger. His danger was quieter and more systemic, the danger of a man who had built, over 3 years, an entire economic trap that kept every miner in Copper Bend permanently indebted to a company store charging prices no honest wage could ever fully satisfy, ensuring that every family in the settlement remained exactly as dependent on Pharaoh's continued goodwill as the day they'd first arrived. He kept 2 enforcers close at all times, a broad, humorless man named Gus Tolliver and a wiry, nervous gun hand named Petey Marsh, both paid in genuine coin rather than the worthless scrip Pharaoh forced on everyone else, and both entirely willing to ensure that any miner who questioned the company, store's inflated prices, or Pharaoh's control over the payroll understood exactly what happened to men who caused that particular kind of trouble. 4 weeks before the stranger arrived, Pharaoh had made an example severe enough that Copper Bend still spoke of it only in careful whispers. A miner named Amos Kessler, calculating with painful precision exactly how thoroughly the company store's prices had trapped his family in permanent debt despite 3 years of honest labor, had organized a handful of fellow miners to formally petition the Ackerman Copper Company's Denver office directly, bypassing Pharaoh's control entirely. Pharaoh discovered the petition before it ever left Copper Bend, and had Gus Tolliver break Kessler's right hand so thoroughly that the miner would never again hold a pickaxe, let alone a pen, dismissing the injury publicly as an unfortunate mining accident that the company's own safety inspector, conveniently on Pharaoh's payroll, confirmed without ever actually examining the scene. That was the proof of threat that should have told any careful observer exactly what kind of trap Duke Farrow had built beneath Copper Bend's ordinary mining town's surface. Not simple corruption, but an entire deliberate architecture of debt and fear designed to ensure no miner ever accumulated enough independence to challenge it. The settlement's only law enforcement, a thoroughly compromised deputy named Otis Reyes who received his own salary directly from the Ackerman Copper Company rather than any territorial authority, had learned over 3 years to develop a very particular and very convenient blindness whenever Pharaoh's control required an outlet. The stranger rode into Copper Bend on a cold, overcast afternoon 4 weeks after Amos Kessler's crippling, with nothing about him remarkable enough to draw more than a passing glance from the handful of exhausted miners heading home after their shift. He rode a lean brown mare gone thin from a long stretch of mountain trail, wore a plain, weather-stained canvas duster, and kept a battered gray hat pulled low enough that the boarding house keeper who rented him a room that evening, a cautious widow named Mrs. Poole, couldn't afterward have said with any real confidence what color his eyes were. He asked for a room and a meal, paid honestly in worn but genuine coin, and mentioned nothing at all about his business in Copper Bend beyond a vague intention to inquire about mining work. "You'll want to think twice about mining work here," Mrs. Poole told him, mostly out of the same worn habit she extended to every stranger passing through. "Company pays in scrip that's worthless anywhere but the company store, and that store charges prices that keep a man in debt no matter how hard he works. Duke Farrow runs both, and this settlement's learned it's easier to stay quiet than argue." "Obliged for the warning," the stranger said, and that was the whole of their conversation. He kept to himself his first day in Copper Bend, watching more than he spoke, the way careful men do in towns they don't yet understand. He walked the length of the settlement's single street, noting the particular exhausted deference every miner showed toward Pharaoh's occasional appearances, and the company store's prices, posted plainly for all to see, charging nearly double what the same goods commanded in any legitimate mountain settlement he'd passed through on his way to Copper Bend. And on his second evening in town, sitting quietly at the edge of the settlement's only saloon, he overheard two of Pharaoh's enforcers drinking loosely about the fabricated safety report that had covered up Amos Kessler's crippling, and about the exact ledger Pharaoh kept hidden in his own office, documenting the company store's true markup against the wholesale prices the goods actually cost. The stranger finished his drink at his usual unhurried pace and left considerably ahead of the enforcers, understanding now, with the plain certainty of a man reading a ledger of facts rather than a rumor, exactly what kind of trap Duke Farrow had built, and exactly where the proof of it was kept. He encountered Pharaoh himself the following afternoon, walking the settlement's muddy main street on his way to inquire further at the company store. And Pharaoh, bored and looking for exactly the kind of casual entertainment 3 years of unchallenged control had made habitual, decided the drifter's unremarkable presence represented a convenient opportunity to remind Copper Bend's watching miners exactly who controlled every inch of ground beneath their feet. "New face," Pharaoh said, stepping directly into the stranger's path, Tolliver and Marsh fanning out behind him with the easy confidence of men who had watched this particular performance play out dozens of times before without consequence. Pharaoh reached out and, with a single contemptuous motion, knocked the stranger's hat from his head into the thick mud of the street, then brought his boot down hard onto it, grinding his heel slowly enough for the gathering crowd of tired miners to watch him do it. "Man walks into my town, he learns quick whose ground he's standing on," Pharaoh said. "That hat's ruined now. Maybe you'll remember to show proper respect next time, before I decide your boots need the same lesson." The stranger looked down at the ruined hat, then up at Pharaoh, his expression carrying no anger in it at all. "Wasn't much of a hat," he said. "Wasn't much of a lesson either." Pharaoh laughed, loud enough that half of Copper Bend heard it from their windows, utterly certain that the drifter's quiet words meant nothing beyond a humiliated man's empty bluster, the same certainty that had carried him unchallenged through 3 full years of manufactured economic control. He was wrong about that, in the particular way arrogant men are always eventually wrong. The stranger did not leave Copper Bend, nor did he seek out Pharaoh again that same day. He spent the following 2 days instead doing what careful, patient men have always done once they've decided a place needs setting right. He gathered proof. He located Amos Kessler at the miner's own modest cabin, his ruined hand still wrapped in permanent bandages, and listened, with the same patient stillness that had unsettled Mrs. Poole at the boarding house, to the full account of the fabricated safety report and the petition Pharaoh had suppressed before it ever reached Denver. "You still have a copy of what you were going to send?" the stranger asked. Kessler's good hand trembled slightly as he retrieved, from beneath a loose floorboard, a carefully preserved duplicate of the original petition, signed by 11 miners willing, at the time, to risk Pharaoh's retaliation for the chance at honest wages. "Kept it hidden after what happened to my hand," Kessler said. "Wasn't sure I'd ever have the nerve to send it again." "You will," the stranger said. It was the second full sentence he had spoken since arriving in Copper Bend, carrying the same flat, unhurried certainty that had already begun to feel, to Kessler, like the first genuine hope his family had experienced in 3 years. The stranger spent his 4th day in Copper Bend locating, through careful and patient inquiry, exactly where Pharaoh kept his hidden ledger documenting the company store's true markup. And on the evening of that fourth day, while Pharaoh and his enforcers were occupied at the saloon, retrieved the ledger from Pharaoh's own office along with several months of falsified safety reports. Pharaoh had used to cover up not only Kessler's crippling, but at least two similar incidents, involving miners who'd questioned the company store's prices in the years before. He rode out at first light on the fifth day, not fleeing Copper Bend but carrying Kessler's petition, Pharaoh's own hidden ledger, and the falsified safety reports directly to the Ackerman Copper Company's regional inspector, stationed at a legitimate mining settlement 2 days' ride away, a man whose entire professional reputation depended on exactly the kind of documented fraud the stranger now placed directly in his hands. Word that the drifter had left Copper Bend reached Pharaoh within hours, and Pharaoh, discovering shortly afterward that his own office ledger was missing, understood immediately, with the particular cold panic of a man watching 3 years of carefully constructed control collapse in the space of a single realization, exactly what had happened and exactly how much danger it represented. "Find him," Pharaoh told Tolliver and Marsh, his usual booming confidence carrying a genuine edge of desperation now. "Whatever he's carrying, it doesn't reach anyone with real authority. You understand me?" Tolliver and Marsh rode out that same afternoon, tracking the stranger's trail toward the regional settlement, and caught up to him on the fourth evening, just as he'd completed his business with the company inspector and begun the return journey toward Copper Bend to formally witness whatever consequences his evidence had already set in motion. They found him camped beside a mountain stream, unhurried and entirely unbothered by their arrival, the particular stillness that had unsettled every careful observer he'd encountered since riding into Copper Bend 5 days before. "Pharaoh wants that ledger back," Tolliver said, his hand resting near his own weapon, with the casual menace of a man who had never once, in his employment, needed to fully commit to violence before. "Ledger's already with the company inspector," the stranger said. "Copies went out by wire to Denver this morning. Nothing left in Copper Bend worth writing back for." Marsh's hand dropped toward his own revolver, the particular desperate reflex of a man realizing his employer's entire fraudulent operation had already unraveled beyond any hope of quiet repair, and the stranger's response left no room for a second attempt. Marsh found himself disarmed and sitting hard beside the stream before his weapon had fully cleared its holster, the same economical, unhurried motion the stranger had shown since arriving in Copper Bend. Tolliver, watching his fellow enforcer go down in less than a second, raised his own hands without further argument, already understanding exactly which side of this confrontation deserved his continued cooperation. "Pharaoh sent you to bring me back, or to make sure I never made it that far in the first place?" the stranger asked. "Bring you back," Tolliver admitted. Pharaoh's desperate enough now he might have meant something worse, but he didn't say it plain. "Ride back and tell him the ledger's already done its work," the stranger said. It was the third full sentence he had spoken since the confrontation began, and the third to last he would speak in Copper Bend's story entirely. "Whatever he's got planned next, it won't matter. Company's already sending its own people to sort out what he's built." The Ackerman Copper Company's regional inspector arrived in Copper Bend 6 days after the stranger's initial visit, carrying formal authority to investigate the falsified safety reports and the company store's fraudulent markup, both thoroughly documented by Pharaoh's own hidden ledger and corroborated by Amos Kessler's preserved petition and testimony. The investigation that followed confirmed a pattern of systematic fraud stretching back nearly 3 years, implicating Duke Farrow in both the deliberate crippling cover-up and years of wage theft disguised as legitimate company policy. Pharaoh was removed from his position within the week, the company's Denver office replacing him with a legitimate administrator who converted the payroll to honest coin within a month and adjusted the company store's prices to something approaching fair market value. Amos Kessler received compensation for his ruined hand that finally allowed his family to leave Copper Bend for a settlement where his remaining good hand could find honest work, and the 11 miners who'd signed his original petition found, for the first time in 3 years, a company willing to actually hear their grievances rather than crush them. The stranger did not stay to witness any of it fully resolved. By the time the regional inspector's investigation was formally underway, He had already ridden on past Copper Bend entirely, continuing whatever journey he'd originally intended before Duke Farrow's boot had found his hat in the mud, the memory of that humiliation already fading into just one more encounter among a great many others. "Will Copper Bend get better now?" a young miner asked Mrs. Poole, watching the regional inspector's formal proceedings from the boarding house window. Mrs. Poole considered the question a long while, the particular weight of a woman who had just watched 3 years of quiet, systemic corruption, finally answered by something more patient than anger. "This settlement's going to get honest wages now," she said. "Something it should have had from the very first shovel of copper anyone pulled out of that mountain." Nobody in Copper Bend ever learned the stranger's name. Nobody could agree, in the years that followed, on which direction the brown mare had carried him once his business there was finished, or whether the stories that trickled in afterward from other struggling mining settlements. A company town in Nevada whose scrip system collapsed overnight under a regional investigation. A mine foreman in Montana whose falsified safety reports simply vanished into a federal inquiry. Belonged to the same quiet, patient man at all, or to the growing legend that had already outrun him entirely. But in Copper Bend, at least, they knew one thing for certain, and told it to every family that settled there afterward. Once the company finally paid honest wages for honest labor, the way other mining towns told stories around a fire at the end of a long shift, that once, a man had watched his own hat ground into the mud without a flicker of anger crossing his face, and had made sure within 5 patient days that the man who'd done the grinding lost considerably more than a stranger's battered hat ever cost him. Do you think the stranger knew the moment his hat hit the mud exactly how he'd answer it? Or did the shape of his response only come together once he heard about Amos Kessler's hand? Let us know your theory in the comments below. If this story of quiet patience answering a boot in the mud gripped you the way it gripped us, smash that like button. Share it with someone who believes real power is never measured by who can humiliate the most. And subscribe with the bell on so you never miss the next true telling of the Nameless gunman's legend.